Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Bubolz and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Bubolz and Jeff Molesky.
And we are recording. All right, Mr. Bubolz, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week on the podcast, we've got Troy Magennis. Troy joins us from Seattle. Troy's been an executive. He's worked with a lot of major companies and helped them with probabilities and forecasting and understanding metrics. And we were just joking about how he just loves data. So we're gonna dive into some of the details of that. So thanks for joining us, Troy.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So Troy, we were talking before we got started here about this new course that you have. It's a free course, the Math on Flow. So what's your goal with this course that you put out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of material that explains some of the underpinnings of Agile and flow systems in general. And back in the late 80s and 90s, there's a book called called Factory Physics. And Factory Physics sort of changed the world of manufacturing because it gave people the reasons why setting up flow systems in production lines was a good idea. And our industry pulled on that a lot. If you look at Donald Robinson's work, Principal Product Development Flow and those sort of things, he's constantly referencing that book, but bringing it into our domain. So what I wanted to do was try and change the format of how we present that agile physics sort of mathematics of flow to a new generation. So of course we had to use video, and so I sort of decided that I would put up and record over time a series of articles and videos and spreadsheets which try and teach the underpinnings of a lot of what we profess as true in Agile. So what batch size and utilization of efficiency and things like that, and why cycle time follows certain distribution shapes and what we can learn from it. Little things over the years I've had to explain one-on-one. I'm now trying to do a bit more efficiently and let people to just subscribe over time. And as I add more material, they will get it.
Yeah.
The boring stuff. No one's going to buy it, so I've made it free.
Great stuff, though. So when someone says, well, why do I care about flow? You're an executive. You've been an executive. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, well, if you don't sort of take control of flow at a full organizational level, you'll get local efficiencies of flow in certain teams and areas and so forth. So one of the things around predictability that upsets executives is they never get what they want, right? They get everything, they get something, but it's never sort of what they sort of plan to get. And as we sort of grow the number of teams, flow gets a lot harder to measure, observe, and control across a whole organization where there's competing needs and competing people and competing fiefdoms. So what I sort of try and do in sort of talking about flow is get people to zoom out a bit and look at flow through the whole organization, not just local team flow. And I think Agile's done a good job starting to understand and help teams flow themselves individually, but we've done a poor job giving advice of how to help organizations flow across multiple teams, a la dependencies.
What do you see? Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just kind of curious when you're saying zooming out and looking at that more organizationally. I'm curious if it's implied in there that we're looking at a system where there's lots of dependencies and handoffs between teams, or is it more we want to look at it from the point of almost like a concept to cache idea? So if we have a team that is able to take ideas from a backlog, do all the work themselves, and push it out to a team, would that be synonymous with the organizational level that you're looking at?
Potentially, yeah, because there's more than just team handoffs as dependency types. Sometimes there's we need to learn something before we do something. Now, I mean, the biggest secret is as you move up in an organization, you get to VP level. Every VP is a VP of no. Because what happens is everything gets escalated to that point, and what you're really doing is just you're breaking an argument and sort of saying, no, we're going to do this instead. Now, as organizations grow and there's more things that they can deliver, what happens is you've got to say no to the right things and then explain it, because locally it seems like an excellent idea. So in zooming out, what you're really doing is you're trying to sort of say, as a company, although these are all fantastic things we should do, I need this one done earlier for a reason that may not be publicly known to you at the moment. We're about to be acquired. We're about to acquire someone else. There are sort of many things that you want to do. So I think dependencies to me is about sort of increasing the value density of what you're delivering towards a strategy and an outcome, not just all local, really good outcomes. I'm more trying to orchestrate a denser value delivery towards an intentional outcome. And that's not a shared outcome across all parts of the organization. So they argue about, and I mean, it just seems insane. What? You want me to pause that and do this? Are you insane? Like, this is an incredibly local, profitable sort of feature. And it is, but it's not sort of furthering a strategy as much of all. I mean, you think back to the Blockbuster executives, right? Well, we make our money from late fees and we make our money from setting up DVDs, like, let's keep our eye on the prize until it wasn't. So that isn't, the teams were delivering flawlessly, but organizationally. So I think managing dependencies is more about increasing the value of the business intentional strategy growth rather than just anything. So we tend to boil that down to a simple point of, let's just make sure we do handoffs team to teams in a small, smoother way. Great, more power to you. But let's weigh in and have a way of understanding, given that you're a constraint, I want you to work on A rather than B for these reasons. And dependencies becomes a bit more of a asset. We view it now as being this big problem we've got to solve, but what it's really highlighting is that we've got to expend our effort wisely. How are we going to do that? That's what I mean by zooming out.
So really, I don't know. I'm going to reframe this in a different way. You tell me if you agree or disagree. So like, it's kind of a balance then at that point between a little bit of predictability of delivery, effectiveness and efficiency. And you're making those trade-offs inside of the organization, but hopefully strategically, like you were saying, towards whatever goal or strategy you have as a product that you're trying to deliver to your customers. What are your thoughts on that? The way I reframe that?
No, I like it. It's true. I mean, we get down to predictability, and I think what your job is to not blow the whole company based on any one decision that you make, right? So you've got to take smaller bets to make sure that you can get in the direction. But even there, you can't be certain it's going to work. So you just got to be somewhat sure this is the best bet we can make at the moment with the constraints we have, and put effort into solving the constraints. So I see that as strategy. I see strategy as being, we want to do something, but we're unable to because we're structured in a certain way. That's my problem to solve. Hopefully before it becomes the inevitable end.
How do you help clients see that? Because a lot of times people think of good decisions based off the outcome, right? And sometimes you took a real low probability bet and you got lucky. And so and sometimes you took a really high probability bet and you didn't get luck, you got unlucky, it didn't hit. So how do you help clients to like realize that and make, better bets?
Yeah, I think in our industry, the positive stories of small bets that turned out well are already covered in the press. They're very rare, and they sort of we have a lot more counter examples than pro examples of small, low probability bets turning good. We're very much in the reversion to mean zone where everything's a toss up, where pick your backlog by tossing a coin is probably going to outperform even a large amount of analysis. But your job still is to help people understand why they're doing things, so it's not just you making that bet alone. So now we're increasing the odds of it being a correct bet because we're drawing upon the group consensus and understanding, and hire people who disagree a lot to make sure that you've got the counterbalance of you going off half-cocked thinking that you've got all the right answers. That doesn't happen, even Okay, this may need to be cut. But, if you look at Elon Musk, he acquired Tesla. He didn't start the cars. He acquired the company. He acquired SpaceX. He acquired them once there was some chance of it being successful. So he's not that renegade going out spending his money on very high risk projects. He acquires companies once they've proven it's possible to do and more likely than not to occur. He gives the illusion as if it's all just sort of spontaneous, but it's not. And I think that's sort of, if you want to stand out, that's the way you do it. You take credit for it after everyone else has done the hard bits. And that's how you get ahead being an executive. But, be under no illusion, we don't hear about his failures as much as we hear about his successes.
Yeah, I just rewatched your 2018 Agile keynote, and like I love it. I find it inspirational every time I go back and listen to it. And there's a lot of different topics that you hit on in there. I've got a number of things that I would love to get to at some point if we've got time. But you were just talking about those biases that are inherent in when we're making decisions on things, and in particular survivorship bias, right? The things that survive, we give undue weight to when we're trying to make decisions on. And that is, at least that's what I was hearing in the example that you were just talking about with Tesla. Is like we only see the successes that were survived, and thus we give them more weight. Another great example of that, and my wife would kill me for using this as an example, but like she loves crime junkies. All right, yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, my wife does too. Should we be worried? Should we be concerned? I mean, the Google history says how to hide a body. Should we?
Look, I don't think I'm worth that much. My life insurance plan isn't that high.
Good strategy.
But to her, all the doors are locked at night. The security cameras are on because her mental picture of the world is crime is everywhere and we always have to be prepared. But that's because that's what's kind of fed into the system, and that's what she gives preference to when making decisions on things. And I think it's a fun thought experiment to think about, like, what are the biases that we have when we're making decisions, and what are all the other influences that if we took a step back, and that's why I think data is a powerful thing. Like that was one of the other things with data plus conversation. But what can we remove those biases for when we have empirical data to be looking at and help inform the decisions that we want to be using to make decisions moving forward on.
Yeah, I agree. And my wife calls that what you sort of said, we'll be murdered in our sleep. So yes, the doors are locked here as well, just in case anyone wants to come around. But yeah, I mean, exactly. We decision making is and always will be imperfect. And the biggest tool in the toolbox for solving that is by having a diverse group of people agree on something, or at least give you all the reasons why it won't work. So if you're not that type of leader that is open to negatives and things being said that's wrong, you're just asking for making a poor bet at some point in time, because there's always someone quietly sitting in the corner sort of saying, this is a real dumb idea. And if you haven't had an environment where that's possible to express that, then you get what you deserve. So I sort of, you got to find a diverse crowd of people to make those, to help you avoid your cognitive biases. And if you're just getting all white 50-year-old males, you're also getting biases. So, like it makes no sense to actually to not realize that intelligent people come from all walks of life. It's just plain dumb.
One thing that I guess, you could ask the people doing the work or the people that know a space and say, what do you think? And you could get a lot of perspectives and try to do some analysis. But I think it comes down to small bets, like you were saying, but in production, like frequent leasing, learning in a marketplace, and then looking for patterns. Because it's like product development is like a game that we're playing that's an infinite game, but the rules are always changing. And so you have to figure what the rules are, and you don't know until you play the hand. And if you don't play the hand, you don't know what the rules are. So you played a big bet and the rules changed and you lost. So better to make small bets, figure out the rules and the patterns, and then try to make your bigger bet, at the right time if you're going to make a bigger bet. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? instead of
think
just
so.
asking people, try to release frequently. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're increasing your group to all your customer base. I mean, what bigger group can you have to test your ideas on than everyone who's going to use it, right? So you're just increasing the feedback pool, and I think that's sort of the way to go. I mean, your main job is to make sure that no bet will wipe you out. So I mean, we know the upper limit. If I'm making an extinction level event by going up with this decision and going in this direction, then that's probably a bad idea. And we know doing nothing at all has its own risk. So the answer's somewhere in between. And
Right.
I would, that's why when I teach prioritization techniques, I talk about you got to understand the company and the market you're doing it for. Because if you only have a chance to invest in one more bet before you're bankrupt, make it a good one. So the less money you have, the more research you should do, because if you get it wrong, you're going to bankrupt the company. So the companies who have a large amount of cash and can afford to fail multiple times, they can be a bit more cavalier with their decision making. So you got to put the context in it here of understanding the market you're in and how fast it's moving, because doing nothing may send you bankrupt just as fast as doing one thing badly. So it's all context. Gee, I sound like a consultant.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the game of poker, right? Like if you play Texas Hold'em, like if you were down and short stacked and you just like kept anteing and anteing and you never play any hands and you just lose all your money, right? If you don't do anything. But at some point you have to say, I think I have a good enough hand to win, and you've got to go all in. Like that's a common strategy that people have when, the people they're playing have more money than they do and you can't buy
Well,
back in.
yeah,
So
you
they'll go
can't.
all in with a short stack with with what they think is a better hand than everybody else, trying to, you know, win that with one big hand. And that might be a choice like you're talking about.
Well, a lot of the
Makes sense to that
strategy is
point.
to help your competitors fail, force them into a situation where they have to invest in an area that's they can't. Force them into an area where you're getting their most profitable customers away from them with a key sexy feature, right? So strategy isn't just about sort of what's logical and what everyone wants. Sometimes what you're trying to do is drive the market in a certain direction to hurt your competitors so that they go bankrupt, leave the table, and now you've got more leeway to do what you want to do. And sometimes it doesn't matter what your customers think. I've had a couple of companies where biggest paycheck wins, and it's right because it's a vision that they have that they're moving forward in, and it's just an incomplete to the market yet where they want to take the industry. And so even sort of in that case there, the customer's direction may mislead you and distract you. So you got to sort of understand sort of how to help the business and facilitate the business being able to achieve what it wants to do. And I think that's where we come in Agile, is that we give you the opportunity in the system to have multiple bites of the cherry, to progressively move without standing idle, and to change direction should it become necessary. And that's our superpower. So what's the alternative? Go back to going dark for 2 years and then sort of releasing a product that no one wants? I mean, we're not ever going to go back to that, because the being able to running a business in that sense is just too risky now. It would be dumb.
Yep.
But so we're not competing anyone.
We've been going back and forth between these two topics. I find it really interesting. One of the comments, again, referring back to your keynote, not that I expect you to memorize it, but
Oh yes,
one of the interesting things that the comments that you made was we trade off innovation for predictability. And to me, what we've been talking about is those two things thus far. We've been talking about flow and consistency and predictability. And then we started jumping into innovation and strategy and how, what are the new things that we want to experiment with. So when you're coming into an organization, how do you help them find that balance between, hey, we want to be consistent, we want to have flow with our delivery teams, and we want to give them the space to innovate, to experiment, to learn? Like, how do you help an organization find that balance for them?
yeah. It's you make them aware of it to begin with, that there are actually two ends of the spectrum there. And there's an agile coach, not an agile coaching, there's a coaching instrument for executives and behaviors coming out of the psychology world called polarities. And polarities are that whatever behavior you use, you can overdo and underdo. So say you were going to run a marathon, you can train or rest. And there's upsides to training. You build muscle, you build endurance, that's great. And there's a downside to training too much. You get injured, you pull muscles, you get, and then resting. Yeah, okay, your muscles recover and you actually have the ability to stay feeling well. But the downside of too much rest is you're actually not building endurance and you're not going to be able to run the marathon again. So what happens is people constantly oscillate between too much and too little. And our job as coaches is to help them understand when they move into the downside of any one of those extremes. So if you only did innovation, what would be your early warning indicator that there's too much innovation? Well, we're not sort of dealing with our current customer needs. We're sort of adding features that have very low uptake, and then I try and help them put a metric on. So if we find that the people don't move to the next version of our product within 3 weeks of its release, we've probably released something that our current market didn't want. So maybe our innovation is moving too far. And then on the counter side, if we just look after our current customers, how could we tell that we're doing too much of that? And they might say, well, we start losing our current customers to a competitor because of one or two key features. So we get more. And when you lose a sale, you do a sales objection. Why did we lose you? Why didn't you buy from us? Just if we can buy 5 minutes of your time and send you a Starbucks gift card, tell us why you chose the competitor. And they might say, because they had this feature that you don't have. So now you know that you're under-investing in innovation. So I try and help them set some very simple, easy measures that have a binary answer to them. Once we start losing the defect rate is more, the defection to the competitor rate is more than X%, we're going to stop and reassess our strategy and maybe increase the investment in new innovative features to get back to parity. Stuff like that. So, but it starts with making them realize there's a where there is an or constraint, we only do innovation or we only do sustaining work. I help them understand that our job is to slide the lever somewhere between those 2 points and how to tell. Mm-hmm. So I tend to coach on metrics, not just on the performance of the flow, but how to detect where we're overdoing a metric. Because you can do any metric. You can have 0 defects. What would you do? Well, stop writing code would be the easiest one. No more defects are going to be introduced, right? Maybe right. Sort of spend another 6 hours sort of testing on my machine before checking in. All that sort of decreases your ability to deliver fast. So even things which seem to be obviously that you should try and strive for have a downside if overdone. So I spend a lot of my time trying to help people solve those dilemmas and make them do a bit of each. And the job is to pick where on that bit of each.
Without necessarily asking you to, give away the secret sauce if you've got some, but do you have kind of like the Troy Magennis go-to metrics? Like when you go into an organization, you're looking for cycle time, flow, you're looking for value delivery. Like, do you have kind of like your go-to set of metrics that if this organization isn't looking at this, this is where I start?
No, I don't have exact metrics. Like I have my favorites, but I view performance as being this 6-way tug of war between competing needs. And I'm going to try and remember them. Sort of, sure, you want to do things fast. So you want your cycle time to be low or your lead time to be low, right? So there's an element of moving fast. Mm-hmm. There's an element of moving a lot of stuff. So throughput or velocity, that stuff is moving. Now, whatever you measure depends on what level in the organization you're looking at. So it might be stories at a team level, but it might be features at an org level. It might be products at an even higher level than that. So we got speed and we got the amount of stuff you do, a quantity. And then we got the consistency of that quantity, because it's no good just doing these big bursts of, we got a heap done. Oh my God, we're exhausted. Oh my God, we got a heap done. Oh my God, we're exhausted, right? So that's the variance of how much you sort of deliver. And then you've got how well you're doing it. Is it what you're releasing? Are you having to roll back production all the time? Like, don't tell me you're really a high-performing org because you can deliver a lot really fast, really stable, but you broke production every time you did it. That's no good. So they're the four main flow metrics that you got to get a control of at all points of the organization. And it matters less what metric you have there and more that you can spot where by saying do things faster and do more of it with impacted quality, or by sort of saying, let's just do quality that you've impacted cycle time. And it's about helping the team see where they've made unintentional trade-offs, or you as an executive have forced them to make a trade-off. And the other two that you've got to make certain, because they were the four that Larry Mascheroni and everyone come up with in the early days of the product software performance index. But I found you could do all those really well and still fail as a company because you weren't releasing what people wanted. There wasn't a value metric, a fit for purpose sort of metric. And then I thought, oh, okay, now we're done. There's 5. That's a good sort of prime number. So I'm happy with that. But then I realized you could do all those 5 absolutely perfectly and still screw up because you treated your people so poorly they left. You treated your people so poorly that they just sort of would work for anyone else other than you. So there needed to be some form of measure of sustainability that you would set up an environment where your teams and processes and products could consistently do that month after month, year after year. And it turns out that's the one I go after first, because if an organization can't prove to me that they're operating in a sustainable way, it doesn't matter what the other metrics were. They're not going to be that when I look next. So if I can't go into an organization and make sure that they're operating and managing their product development organizations in a sustainable way, I can't use any of last week's metrics to forecast. I can't use any of last week's metrics to make any coherent decision about how I should structure or organize my teams. It doesn't matter because they're not going to be there and they're not going to be operating the same way by the time I need them to be. So I start with sustainability. I make sure there's a way that the company understands how they choose the work they're doing. That's my value metric. And that can be as simple as, this is what we said we were going to do and this is what we delivered. Why aren't they similar? What have you done wrong there, right? Or it could be the ratio of innovation versus sustaining features, something that sort of shows that they have a handle on the metrics. And then I go after the traditional flow metrics to make sure that now we're able to put work through that system. Because if you're not choosing the right stuff, and if you don't have a way of making sure you can continue to deliver that stuff, I don't care what flow metrics said you were doing. So I start with those first two and then move on to the traditional flow metrics to make sure that the organization is moving stuff.
The other one, the category that I look at is like unrealized value, so market share. So imagine you're Netflix right now, right? So Netflix has, I don't remember the exact stats, but it's like 70 million accounts in the US or something like that. And there's like 130 million households, they figure, something like that. So pretty saturated at this point through the pandemic. So what are they going to do? They're going to keep adding new features. We're just going to love it as users. We're not going to drop it, but they're not going to make any more money. And if their goal is to make more money and have more margins, and they want growth, well, that's not going to do anything for them. So what they need to do is say, well, what else are we going to do? Well, we can't capture this other area unless we do something else. Maybe we need to have a tier for ads, and that's going to capture that last little bit. Or maybe we need to get into gaming because that's a whole nother market area. Or maybe we need to, I don't know, do something else, right? There's other avenues to open up in different areas and charge more, or to provide more value to your customers so you can charge more. So I think that there's some type of unrealized value or market share that you have to take into consideration. Because at a certain point you can be too saturated, or it's just the acquisition cost isn't worth it in that market segment that you're in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff hit it before where he talked about, success biases and stuff like that, that we take credit for stuff which probably wasn't ours alone. I see a lot of cases the market is responsible for the growth of the company rather than anything we do in product development. So we like to take credit that we've got this good, well-performing product org that chooses the right features, and that's what's causing our growth. But we know it was a pandemic, and everyone sort of puts yourself on mute, sort of turns at 45 degrees and watches Netflix while they're in the middle of their Zoom calls. Or is that just me? Maybe it's not just me. I don't do it when I'm running training, but that's why I have so many exercises in my training. But the point is, a lot of the time, discerning whether it was the market that was growing or your decisions around the product is near impossible to do. And what happens often the first time companies find out about it is they're the last to know. Everyone else has worked it out except them, streaming is important. So I don't have any magic sauce in that area other than I'm very skeptical when I get given, we wouldn't be this successful if we didn't know what we were doing as a product org. Yes, you're the only source of ice in the Sahara. I think that you were going to do well, even if you were inefficient at producing ice. And then but you're taking credit for it. And being a consultant, I can get away with being a bit more brutal and blunt on that one-on-one with some executives, right? But I think that the best I can do is increase their curiosity to understand, have we just fell into a good market here, or did we do something to cause it? And then I sort of say, well, let's increase the chance that you are responsible, and not just taking credit for it. So it's a tough one to know, and I don't think anyone really sort of knows. And say you're SpaceX, and now all of a sudden the alternative supplier of sending astronauts to the ISS is suddenly sort of now under sanctions. Do SpaceX take credit for the increase in business of launching satellites and astronauts to the ISS now? I mean, it wasn't there. They didn't cause the war. So, So, I mean, I think the more senior you get in the executive world, the more you realize how little you control. So control the things you can, and the only thing you can really do is make sure you treat people well, keep them happy, and get out of their way. And you alone will certainly want to take credit for it, to, if no other reason than to earn your yearly bonus. So, I mean, you are a biased sort of a biased adjudicator of your own success at that level. And you get rewarded for it when it wasn't even because of you. So you get reaffirmed constantly.
Yeah, those are interesting topics.
I know it's a bit far from Agile for you. I know, sorry, but I mean, you see why Agile's needed now, right? Because I mean, when we do want to make a change in a decision and change our mind, we need to be able to action it.
I was thinking just examples as you were going through that, right? You've got Zoom, you've got Peloton, and like, nobody sat around and was like, hey, this is going to be the right market to be in when the pandemic hits, right? Like, exactly. So good examples there. If you don't mind, I kind of want to, there's two other things that I would love to pick your brain on. We'll start with one. So has anything changed in your perspective about, or is there any new data that you can bring to the conversation around the story point versus throughput conversation? I think you did a really good job of kind of identifying the difference there, and it is an it depends conversation. And I think the other thing that you really hit on was like, do both, find out which works better for you. But you had outlined a lot around your your proficiency or process efficiency, and how that plays into helping you decide which one is really just dependent on the number of dependencies or blockers that you have in your system as you're measuring things that flow through it that can help point you in that direction. So it's always a fun conversation, but I was curious, like, is there any newer information that you bring? Do you still have that same position that you had back in 2018? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest error I see in forecasting is the assumption that the size of the piece of work we're typing and coding is the major influence in lead time or cycle time. And it won't be, especially in scale organizations where we've got handoffs to other teams. We know that it's going to sit idle in a backlog somewhere, or it's going to be blocked waiting for something elsewhere. And that's why, I had that map of flow. One of the areas is on why does lead time distribution follow a certain shape? And it turns out to be it's the percentage of delays that we have in the system and the likelihood of those delays and the length of those delays and how many of them we have. I mean, we're in a very delay-rich environment in software development. And of course, if you zoom out right to it's an idea we want to build to delivery, that's going to be even more delays than at a team level. We've committed to doing it, we're going to do it, and we've done it. So at a team level, the size of the work probably will be a better indicator of lead time because within the team has chosen to do it because they know they can do it, they're doing it, and it's done. So at a team level, the size of the work will be a better indicator as long as work doesn't sit idle for long periods of time based on external dependencies and so forth. But if you zoom out at a multi-team level or an organizational level, that's absurd. It's absurd to think that that any one team cycle time will be an overly large influence of how long it took to deliver that piece of work. And most of the time when we're doing these upfront forecasts, we're doing it with multiple stories at a time. So, we've got to do this feature is 15 to 25 stories worth of work. So as the story count grows, the more error you would introduce, assuming that story size played a pivotal role in lead time. And the thing is it's not when we're not using size, we're taking a bet that the size distribution within our backlog sprint after sprint stays relatively stable. So in other words, if you're doing if you're all of a sudden you're doing all really simple pieces of work, really small stories, maybe one big one, and then all of a sudden you shift to doing 100 huge stories and one small one, your forecast is going to be wrong. But that very rarely happens. We often sort of have a backlog has a distribution of a small, medium, and large pieces of work in it. And it's that distribution staying stable that we're taking a bet on when we're ignoring size of individual items. But that is a far safer bet than assuming that work isn't going to sit in another team's backlog occasionally, or that we're going to get blocked waiting for a test environment. And it's the delays that are unrelated to the work item itself, which are the paper cuts in our industry. So no amount of sitting down and analyzing a story and looking at it will tell you that there's going to be a pandemic and your teams are going to have to work remote. No amount of analyzing a single story is going to tell you the fact that your test environment, you're going to have to go back and fix log4j across 100 machines, right? I mean, these things, it's the things which are unrelated to the thing you're looking at, which are the delays which cause our cycle time and process efficiency to be so low. And it's not low, it just is. That's just the process we have. I mean, even in a factory sort of setting, they have storerooms of raw materials before they manufacture it. So if you're looking at from when the raw material arrives to when a finished product goes out, their process efficiency, in the manufacturing world, your lean, which was deemed to be exceptional back in the 80s when I was around, right? That's 30%. So we're only half of what manufacturing and factory people would be proud of in process efficiency. So our 5 to 15%, which is typical in our industry and software processes, is actually pretty damn good. I think that's because of Agile and the way we've sort of adopted it. But being 5 to 15% means that if we assume that the size of the individual item played a role in the cycle time, we'd be wrong, and we are wrong. So if you want to take a safe bet, start with throughput and counts. If you want to be a bit more accurate at a team level, go forth and do velocity and points. but never ever expect those points to be a good predictor at a multiple story level forecast. They add more error than they do accuracy.
I want to double tap on something you said inside of there. We're in a delay-rich environment, and I'm curious. Do you think that's because of how we structure our teams, our organizations, or is it just because we're in a complex environment solving complex problems? Or do you think it's something completely unrelated to that?
I think it's a bit of both, right? I mean, and there's always context. If you're in an environment which is trying to do something that no one in the world has ever done before, then you've got to expect the delays based on learning something. We got to spike this, or we got to test this, or we got to choose or do some research on that sort of stuff. But if you're on version 134 and you're still getting stuck based on getting clarifications around requirements, that's a problem to solve, right? What do I think about this question is our tool vendors have completely screwed up. Because if we look back at what has happened in the manufacturing world, in the lean world, it was all about managing the delays. If you look at what we've done in the agile software world, it's all about managing status and where it is. And what we really want data around is where it's not moving. So what we should be in the business of is vividly trying to find the reasons work isn't flowing unnecessarily. So it's not, don't count your planned outages, you count your unplanned downtime. You count all, because you may take an environment offline to refresh it. You've still got other traffic going somewhere else. But it's the same thing with blockers. There are good blockers and bad blockers. And I think that's where we need to be looking at. If it's avoidable and if it's just sort of something we should go after, we should get some analytics around where work is stopped. Then most of the tools just give you a flag. Oh, it's blocked. Cool. And then everyone, what are we having for lunch? Oh, let's go have a cup of tea. And then they forget it's blocked. So no one ever puts any sort of urgency in fixing it. I mean, there's another stuff there, and you choose whether this goes into the final podcast or not. But I have a whole product called Blocked App, BLOCKED app.com. And it's free, but what it tracks is blockers. So it synchronizes with your Jira. And when you flag something as blocked, it sends a Slack message, it sends an email, it sends a reminder email, it sends a summary at the end of the day, sort of saying, this team is blocked on that team for this reason. And this is the urgency of it. Because what I find is stuff gets blocked and our tools don't place any urgency on getting it unblocked. And we say manage WIP. Why is WIP high? Well, it's because I can't make any progress on this one. Why not? Well, legal hasn't signed off on the privacy statement. We used to just go to the other floor, but now you have to get in your car, drive over to the lawyer's house, tap on the glass window, hold up a firearm and say, sign off on the privacy agreement. And so it's sort of a lot more trouble now than it was. But it's communication on this stuff. So I think there are good blockers through complexity, and we just need time to not through the stuff that we're doing. And there's also unnecessary ones. I absolutely want to go after the unnecessary ones. And I think that's where I want to try and force the tool vendors into having a report of days lost due to avoidable factors report. It's very simple stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting, because then you could take the run rate of a Scrum team or something like that and be like, well, they cost you $40,000 a sprint, and over the last quarter you had 4 sprints that this team was blocked. So yeah, there was $160,000 we wasted this quarter. Put more dollars into it and you'll get some action probably.
It's going to get someone's attention. Yeah. Especially if you put that chart on the back of the restroom door. So when they're doing their business in the restroom, they actually have to look at this chart. Days lost due to causes. Because, they're doing waste. I'm going to show you the company waste at the same time.
I like it.
Win-win.
So when you're talking about the tools, I think that a lot of times the tools are focusing on, keeping people busy in that activation instead of like getting value out the door. And so
Yeah.
I know one of the simple things that I've been really focusing on recently with a lot of clients is just like, just track your work item age. And like when things are going over like that 85% or getting close to that or 70% from this, wherever this is in this flow of this, this value stream, like we need to be doing something. Like there's a reason for that. Like this is age only begats age, right? It's only going to get older. It's only to get more delayed. So let's
Don't we
do
know it?
something about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice way to, I mean, your block thing works too. Cause it's like, well, here, this is blocked. It's stopping. Days are getting counting right now. Like there's something we could do. And so I like both. I like both, I guess.
We've
What's
got
your
to
thoughts
fix
on
those
just like,
causes.
I mean,
I love age.
yeah, you got to fix.
One of the weapon age is a good one to do because it sort of incentivizes fixing and getting rid of the older stuff before starting something new. My only problem with generic sort of age is that just because it's approaching 85%, it's a good point for a conversation, but it might be because it's one of the more innovative style of features of something that's really valuable to do. So it's so in other words, something simple that should have been done. If it's at 85th percentile, that is far worse than something incredibly difficult to do being at the 85th percentile on age. And I don't want to have so I want to make sure that the things that were simple and the types of work that we do as our bread and butter have a different age threshold than the things which are highly innovative and risky and difficult. So I sort of I like to plot age based on work item types, some classification of complexity or difficulty of where we expect it to be. Because I don't want those really simple one-day ones to get to 17 days before I do something about it. I want to sort of say, for this type of work, this is unusually, it's 80. It normally takes us one day to do this stuff, and we're at day 2, or something like rather than having to wait for the average age of everything, all types of work in our process. So I think there's sort of some different bands and stratas and categorization we can do to spot unusual earlier. So snow in Alaska isn't unusual during winter. Snow in California, down in LA is, right. I mean, we got to help people spot abnormal earlier.
Yes.
And
I think that's just a good pattern, right?
yeah, and that's what you're doing with age.
Predictability is really about. Yeah, and because that's really what predictability is about, right? Making better decisions earlier. Like that's all we're really after. So how do you know when something's aging unnecessarily, when something's sitting and just delayed and it could be unblocked very easily? Like those are just whatever your system is, like finding those indicators is really valuable, and then focusing on that, not on like, hey, we need people to work harder because now this thing's, past the 85% in a level.
Well,
like it's never really that.
No. And a lot of those people, even that simple one-day story that went long, could be blocking a whole team from making progress on something else, right? So it's a more complex flow environment that we're dealing with here. So a delay on on a very simple story could be the cause that if you fixed the reason work gets blocked in that way, you unlock a whole heap of extra value delivery that you otherwise wouldn't have got. And that's the exciting stuff I like helping people see is, all right, so sure, I mean, it's only a day longer than normal, but that day longer than normal meant you missed the window to get into this team sprint, which meant that there was a 2-week delay on their side. And we sort of, again, we get these paper cuts in our flow. So these really insignificant and avoidable blockers just start disrupting and making our flow turbulent so that it becomes impossible to predict what we're doing. So if you want to use points and velocity, start dealing with those small reasons that flow gets disrupted, because that's what's causing it to not matter, because it's sitting idle in that other team's backlog for 2 weeks. I don't care if it's a small, medium, and large. It doesn't matter anymore because it's had a 2-week delay sitting still. Ferrari in peak hour traffic. I don't care what speed it could do if it was moving. It's not moving. So that Ferrari and my little Corolla is actually equally performant at that point in time. So a better predictor of how long it's going to take to travel a distance is the time of day you're traveling, not what car you're in.
So I have to ask you, Troy, we talked about your keynote a couple times here, and every time the keynote comes up, you make a little bit of there's a facial reaction that comes on for the listeners that are out there. And so I got to ask you, what is that about? Like, why the reaction?
Oh, I mean, those keynotes are hard. I mean, I just at the start of it that, in the early days there, when I finally told my mother that I was getting married, she looked stunned. She said, "I thought you were gay. You never like you dated. Like what did you do?" And the point is that I probably wasn't. I'm probably severely Asperger's or autistic. But back in the 70s, that was not really sort of diagnosed, right? So standing on a stage with that many people around, having to make eye contact and try and keep a cohesive, coherent thought. But I can't do it in this blog podcast. What was the chance of me doing it in front of that number of people? So that a lot of the time, I think, if you don't do those sort of keynotes all the time, it's an out-of-body experience. So I don't remember what I said. Like I have the slides and I'm told there's a video, but I'm never watching it. Like, are you kidding me? So, I mean, there is I drew on a lot of people's experience there. So, I grabbed people and said, what are the messages you think we need to get out about this stuff? So Cat Sweatle was pretty much, we were up till 2 a.m. the night before finishing the slides, but paring down 300 down to 50, sort of. So that I felt the pressure of that because, it was one of the first times we got the Agile Alliance to take metrics and data as a serious topic that was worthy of a keynote. And I didn't want to blow it. And I had to make it relevant for a group of people I don't have the same views as. So I'm not the Agile coach that, how to run a good retrospective. Like, where's the data? If there's no data, I'm not turning up to the retrospective. So attach the data to the calendar invite and I'll be there. But, so that was a difficult topic for me to talk about to that group. The fact that now people like you are all enthusiastic about it and you're doing your ProCam stuff, Jeff, and stuff like that on metrics is a huge shift in the industry that wasn't there 10 years ago. We were we were still sort of like we were still very raw on the use of data in our world. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, what did you give me out of like a 4 or 5 or a 6 out of 10, maybe?
We, I mean, not to sound brown nosing or anything, but Jeff and I made an entire talk out of just a few minutes of your segment where you, and this is the part that really just struck home to me because I've lived it so many times. But when I go into an organization and I think about all the data that they're collecting, it's these 3 general buckets, right? It's what are we working on next? What's the status of things, and what's the impact of it is? And you mapped it out, and it was like time and time again, that is exactly the experiences that I've had, and you positioned it perfectly, which is like, if we could redo this and we've thought about which would move the needle the most, this is where I would propose us spending the majority of our time on. And literally just 2 weeks ago, we didn't talk about it, but I'm a product manager at Acorns, and I had them watch, a segment of your talk, and then I showed them the Monte Carlo forecasting tool that you have on your website. That's a tool that I've been using for years. I know Jeff uses it. He's talking whenever we're doing courses, and whether this is a Scrum course, for Scrum Masters or product owners, more of a product management course. Like, I am pulling that tool out and showing it and really trying to reinforce why should you give a damn about this? How should you be using a tool with data to help you inform decisions about what you want to be going after next? Because this tool, you plug your shit into it in 5 minutes, like if that, And great, now you've got your forecast. Now you're able to spend all of that time that you would have been spending on this stuff on the bigger, more important questions of what have we learned? What is the value of the things that we just shipped? And how can we use that information to help influence the next stuff that we're going to be going after? So, I mean, I give it nothing short of a 9 or a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, honestly, because I really think it's that valuable, the information that you were putting out there. And, that's actually one of the top questions that I had for you is, you talked about measuring the value of outcomes, or measuring value, measuring outcomes. And as an industry, as to what you were just saying, like, I feel like we're making solid progress in that. That has been a drum that I've been consistently hearing for probably the last 4 to 5 years now. And when I think holistically, I think your keynote was one of the first times that I really started to hear that message. I know Daniel Vicante has also been very animate about this, talks a lot about flow. Jeff and I are both big fans of him. But I feel like that message is being received. And at least personally, I'm starting to see changes in the industry overall. Are you seeing the same thing? Do you have a different perspective on how we're transitioning to that?
No, I see the same thing. I think now it would be ludicrous for any, there is a lagging indicator that the market has adopted something, and that's when the big consulting firms start teaching it. So if you look at what sort of the larger consulting firms are now teaching, they're teaching outcomes in Agile. Yeah. So we know that it not only has it been received, it's being purchased. Otherwise, they wouldn't be offering it. So our job is the things that we do better than the big consulting firms is we make it practical and actionable. Their job is to create the PowerPoint decks that teach the reasoning and the problem case for it, but they won't ever be successful in delivering it. So that takes the whole industry to start building the techniques to do that. And I'm starting to see more people asking for that knowledge. We're still a bit wrapped up with trying to understand how to scale. So I think even if we did choose to do the right things, are we able to get those things done? There's still a bit of a gap there. So I think we need to increase our ability as an industry to, should someone say this is what they want to do, can we do that thing, not just something else based on availability and capacity constraints that we have? And then setting outcomes will have an impact because we'll be choosing work to further an outcome. I like Klaus Leopold's the flight level stuff on that area. It's the one that has a particular flight level, which is about be explicit about what you want to move and then choose the things you're going to do to make that move. And I do the same thing in metrics. I use the ODM sort of style. I come up with the outcome. Tell me the decisions people need to make to cause that outcome to come true. Now tell me the insights you need to see to make that decision. And now I'll tell you what to measure. So I tend to always start with the outcome and decisions that I need people to make. And I think the same thing with value. We come up with the outcomes, that's great, but now we need to enable the systems to deliver work in that order. And often we're structured for yesterday's outcomes, not today's or tomorrow's outcomes. So we need to become faster at reorganizing, dynamic reteaming, team topology sort of stuff to make sure our organizations are capable of delivering things towards those outcomes. And I think until we do both of those, setting the outcomes is just going to become theater. So that's my fear, is that, and which is why I'm so in on dependencies at the moment, because I find that an early indicator that we're not structured to deliver the outcomes we want is that we struggle to collaborate across teams. We get stuck somewhere. We don't have enough of a certain skill that now we need, and we didn't start training them up early enough. So, I think outcomes are absolutely important, and enabling systems to deliver work towards those outcomes is the first step towards allowing that to come true and be useful.
A lot of those dependencies, I still see this, and you would think, after Agile's been around for 20 plus years now, like the cross-functional team's been at the heart of it forever. And teams don't have cross-functional teams. They have too many dependencies, and they're missing skill sets, and then that adds to more dependencies. And I know, I've experimented a lot since you're talking 2018 with larger teams and with clients that I have. And I've had some as large as, 16, 18. And because you get rid of all the dependencies, it works, right? Like there's no dependencies and there's nothing stopping you. We're just going to solve problems for the business now. And the business starts joining and says, we want to be, integrating with you. And like, there's just no delay. And so you get rid of all that delay between teams and multiple backlogs and coordination costs. And it's like, I mean, yeah, there is coordination costs when you have that many people, but like if you have specialized skills and you aren't to the point right now where, you have a way to like propagate that knowledge across the teams, then larger teams can be really a good practice to experiment with. And maybe you split at some point, or maybe you don't, but like, I don't know, don't be afraid of that, upper echelon and experimenting with it. I think, yeah. What are your thoughts on that? I know you talk about that before.
Yeah, that's why I talked about that in that aforementioned keynote. Is that we often we're scared of bloating our teams, up to larger sizes than 7 plus or minus 3. But what we're doing by doing that is we're increasing the coordination costs elsewhere. And maybe that problem of larger team sizes isn't as big as what we were paying dividends to. And that was one of the, the inhalation moments during the keynote. He's saying teams can be larger than 7 plus or minus 3. Oh my God, this guy's terrible. And then I said, you got to compare teams versus teams. And there was even a double inhalation, sort of, because we need to know what are system problems or local problems. And larger teams, if you look at the data, and I presented it there, is that there's a very small, like 3 or 4% difference between 7 and 15 people on a team as far as performance across those 4 flow measures I mentioned earlier. But think about the disruption of coordination of 2 or 3 teams together. That's much more than 3% impact on flow. And so where we do 7 plus or minus 3 people is right at a team level. But what about at an org level? If we applied that same rule to the org, we should never have more than 7 plus or minus 3 teams having to collaborate together. And yet a lot of our organizations have 100 plus. So, I mean, there is no one right number here. If you're in a technical environment which requires a large set of small individual specialist skills, then your teams probably should be larger to give you more chance of having an available resource with that skill set local to you in your control. But I used to just do that during my one-on-ones with my directs when I used to be someone important, right? I used to sort of say, what skill set do you need that you don't have? What skill set do you have that if you gave up would cause the least impact? And I would just do speed dating rounds. So day in, day out, I'd have one-on-ones with my directs, and I would sort of say, well, you need a designer. Well, Jill said she has a designer that she could loan you if you could find her a tester. And I know Jack has a tester. I'll do that. So we were helping people find the right homes temporarily to solve constraints that were emerging based on new types of work we were choosing. So sure, you can plan some of it and get ahead of it, but some of it you have to build a reactive workforce where you still realize that as an organization, you're in it as a whole, not in it as an individual, and start sharing those resources via Zoom.
Just data around that can really help too. I found, like, if you just take like the skill set that you're missing and say, how often are we missing that? And then like measure that over time. Like you'd be like, yeah, it's always that DBA skill set. Like, okay, well, if it's always the DBA skill set, then maybe you need that on your team right now. Like, or, and there's even been examples where it's like, well, it's always legal. And it's like, there is so much here. We actually are going to put the lawyer on the team for like 2 or 3 sprints, and then we're gonna move them off when we're done. But like, there's so much here right now. And that we've done stuff like that in different groups. So I think that can be really valuable. Like, try to get rid of those most frequent ones. Yep.
That's it. It's smart. All right. And like, I mean, that should be the job we're doing. Not arguing whether points or counts are better. We should be dealing with these sort of bigger blockers and objectives to flow.
All right. Well, Troy, thanks for this time. Is there anything at this point that you want to plug to our listeners?
No, I mean, just the free course and whatever. So I'm sure there'll be links in that. Learn.focusedobjective.com is where that free course is at. And if you want to start tracking blockers and getting data around dependencies and blockers and days lost due to different types, blockedapp.com, BLOCKED app.com. And again, you don't have to pay anything for those. And yeah, go forth and think broader. Agile's a big space where we don't have to get stuck in just sort of running retrospectives.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.